Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Redmen TV. This is your latest edition of Expert Insight with myself, Dan Clubb. I am joined today by the host of the Money Talks podcast on Anfield Index, Chatra, to talk through all the key points and the wider ranging issues after Liverpool ranked third in the Deloitte Money League just last week when that was released, when all the stats and the figures were published. We're going to talk through exactly what that means from a Liverpool perspective now and potentially in the future as well. So Mo, first and foremost, my friend, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be on. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, doing good, pretty good, thank you.
Good man, I appreciate you coming on. So I say wider ranging issues. I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek because it has created a huge fallout surrounding anything really to do with Liverpool finances and FSG on a wider scale, really. I think a lot of people see what in many senses should be seen as a positive performance off the field from Liverpool. And a lot of people have taken that and gone, well, surely that means we should be investing more in certain areas. But we're going to talk through exactly what it looks like, exactly how it happened, and what it could mean moving forwards, like I say. So to start with then, Mo, it was a record high for Liverpool when it comes to turnover, 584 million. And it was also a record high finish in the aforementioned Deloitte Money League. Just talk us through what the Deloitte Money League is for a start, I suppose, before we get into it, just in case anybody watching or listening just isn't fully aware what it means.
Sure. Okay, so Deloitte are one of the biggest accountancy firms in the world. And one of the things that they've been doing for the last 26 years is compiling a ranking of the biggest football clubs in the world based on revenue. And so this is the 26th year that they put this out. And the ranking of the 20 top clubs places Liverpool in third place, which is the highest that it has ever finished, behind only Real Madrid, that finished with revenue of £604 million, only 10 million above that of Liverpool, and 619 million was first place reserved for Manchester City Football Club. So well done to them, and especially their commercial department, who work miracles every single year. Liverpool nonetheless placed extremely well in third place with 594 million.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Man City thing, I think, is best left unsaid for this one. I tweeted as it happened, really, like no comments on their place on top spot. I think we'll dig a little bit deeper into the facts and the figures and just exactly what it means. But as you say, Liverpool have outperformed themselves better than they've ever done. That surely should be seen as a positive thing, I suppose, first and foremost. It's clearly something to be celebrated, but who should we be crediting for such an achievement? And is there anyone in particular?
So, I mean, obviously with that news that broke last week about the 594 million, you had different sides of the ownership debate arguing that it was a good result in favour of their argument. So those that say that, look, FSG are doing a really good job and, the FSG out brigade are being very unfair to them, have argued, well, look, the club have achieved a record high turnover, and that is because of the owners. Yeah. That is the argument that's been put forward. They've put in place very good things around infrastructure, which has helped propel match day revenue. They have also put in place good people within commercial, and they achieved a record high turnover of 233 million on the commercial front. And also, they've helped to ensure that the club has invested smartly in transfers over the last 6-7 years, so that the recruitment has enabled success on the pitch, which in turn has helped generate record high levels of turnover in terms of broadcast revenue from the Premier League and Champions League, most notably. And so, therefore, that is the argument put forward by those. On the flip side, those that have been saying, well, look, this is actually backing the argument that FSG are not doing a good job, is arguments on the other side to say 594 million, and yet we're achieving net spend less than clubs like West Ham and Aston Villa, Leeds United, not Leeds United, Nottingham Forest, for example, the most recent transfer window. So how is it possible that a club that generates so much money year on year over the last 4 years struggle to spend at the levels of other rival clubs. So both sides of that argument are using last week's news to say, look, we are right, you are wrong.
Yeah, it certainly added a lot of fuel to the fire, didn't it? Whichever side that you sit on, it seemed like. And you mentioned sort of how it was broke down there in terms of broadcast and commercial. I think the match day is a big part of it too. I think 95 million you reported went on the match day side of things. And that's probably only going to increase, obviously, with the Anfield Road expansion that's going on now. And obviously the main stand's already been completed. That's brought in quite a lot of money. But a huge chunk of this turnover, I think you reported 62% of it went onto wages. Now, is that normal, Mo? Is that like standard across the board in terms of figures? And does that factor in bonuses, incentives, and that sort of thing too, which we know Liverpool are notoriously high spenders in?
Yeah, so the wage bill is definitely an interesting one, and it's created a huge amount of debate, again, amongst different sections of the fan base. So, you've got a certain section of the fan base that's saying, it's proof of how well we are run as a club, that we are now a destination club and not a stepping stone club. That was often the criticism leveled at the club and the owners that, the likes of Luis Suarez, Torres, etc.
Yeah.
were using Liverpool to move on to bigger and better things. And instead, what we've seen in recent years is, footballers come to the club and look to stay at the club and see their best years through at Liverpool. And the wage bill is 368 million, which is the fifth biggest wage bill in world football and the second biggest in the Premier League officially. Now, with that, it's important to note that one of the things Liverpool introduced with the direction of FSG back around 2013-14 was a move towards heavily incentivized contracts. And what that means is that the base salary might not be particularly high compared to that of rival clubs, but there were very significant bonuses built in for wins, for goals scored, for clean sheets, etc., etc. And so the more successful you are, the more money you earn. And that is why Liverpool Football Club's overall wage bill is at such a high level. Now, it's also important to stress that wage bill is not the wage bill just for the playing staff. It's not 368 million purely to pay the 20-odd players within that squad, the first team squad. It covers all staff. It covers Dave in IT. It covers the girls who serve in the canteen at Kirby, match day staff, coaches, academy players. So it's everyone that's on the payroll is accounted for in the 368 million. Now, again, there are people that are arguing, well, look, but FSG must be siphoning some of that money somehow. There is no evidence in the accounts to say that that is happening. So, it's important to acknowledge the fact that, we have invested significant sums into our wage bill. Is that at the expense of other areas of spend, like the transfer fees that we could potentially spend in? Possibly, because ultimately it's a finite pot of money that we have to pay for things for. So the more money you spend on wages, the less money you can then spend on other things. Yeah,
absolutely. And one thing I wanted to ask you as well, we all know signing Jude Bellingham could potentially be really difficult when it comes to the lack of elite European football potentially next season, not to mention the finances. What would happen to Liverpool's wage bill? And indeed, would there be a change at all if we were to miss out on Champions League football? Do you think, because you mentioned sort of the positive bonuses as well, but do you think there's room in those contracts for negative bonuses in terms of you get a wage reduction potentially if we do miss out on such things?
Effectively, yes. So if we take Manchester United as an example, it wasn't all that long ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, where they missed out on Champions League football, fell into the Europa League, and their wage bill went from, I think it was 332 million down to about 284. So it fell by nearly 50 million pounds just by the fact that Man United fell from Champions League into Europa League. And their wage bill, or their wage structure, I should say, is reported to be less incentivized than that of Liverpool Football Club. So it does seem to suggest that if Liverpool were to miss out on Champions League, fell into the Europa League or the Europa Conference, or even missed out on Europe altogether, the wage bill will go down. I can't tell you to what extent, but if the United wage bill went down by close to 50 million, would be fair to argue that Liverpool wage bill will fall by a similar amount, possibly even greater than that. So yes, we would miss out on significant income from the Champions League. Obviously, we made about £100 million last year from competition. And if we fell into the Europa, we'd probably be standing to make 25-30 million, maybe a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
So it would be a drop of around 70 million, but our wage bill would reduce accordingly, not to the same extent as a drop in income, but nonetheless, there would be a drop in the wage bill as well. So the overall hit wouldn't be quite as significant as, the kind of headline of, 100 million of Champions League money we made last year. If we missed out on Champions League, that's 100 million gone. It's not quite as severe as that.
No, it doesn't sound like it as well. And it's fascinating to hear as well, because you don't really factor that in. All you do is you see the headline, Liverpool will miss out on X amount of money if they miss out on the top four. But in the grand scheme of things, potentially not. So yeah, that is really interesting. And it would ring true, like you say, if United's was to fall, Liverpool's would probably follow suit if that was to be the case. God forbid, of course. But listen, the writing could be on the wall when it comes to that potentially. Just finally on the wages side of things, you tweeted in a very interesting thread about all of this, about the wage bill increasing by 54 million from the 2020 to 21 season. So it increased after that. So clearly there was a growth in the wages, meant there was less funds available in spend, and that was what you tweeted. Is there a pattern to that? I think you alluded to it a moment ago in terms of the pot of money, and X amount goes on wages, therefore there might not be as much to spend in the transfer window. Do you think we can actually decipher a clear pattern between that in terms of when our wages increase, on the back of that, we haven't got as much to spend? FSG have been in situ now for a number of years. We can clearly see how they operate. It is self-sustaining. It is based on their model. Is that now obvious? That's the way they work in terms of there's your money, that goes on wages and transfers, and we'll work from that alone.
I think there's a fairly rigid financial model in place. And I think there is an argument, well, there's evidence, I should say, that backs that up. You go back 2 years to the January 2021 transfer window. Everyone and their dog was saying, we need a centre-back. We probably need two. All our centre-backs are injured. We're having to play somebody that used to play at Kidderminster in non-league football last season, and Nat Phillips as well. And yet, who do we get through the door? Kabak and Davis, who never ended up playing for the club, in terms of first team football. And, that at the time was something that obviously many fans rounded on the owners for, to say, look, Jurgen Klopp all but called out the owners, I think very late into the transfer window, almost pleading that, look, we need to get some business done. And we got business done, but we went bargain basement. And I think that demonstrated, to me at least, maybe others will disagree, that despite the plight we found ourselves in, where we had a severe injury problem, certainly at the centre-back position, we were still not willing to flex as a club in terms of that financial model that, look, we have a certain pot of money, and even if it potentially means missing out on a significant pot come the end of the season by missing out on top four, we're still going to rigidly stick to this. So I think that there is that in place. That doesn't mean that it's a completely inflexible model. So we've seen examples of where there has been a bit of flexibility too. So if you look at just this January window and the January before that, we brought in Gakpo this January, and we brought in Diaz last January. And in both cases, it was reported that the players were lined up for summer deals, but when other clubs came sniffing, looking to bring him in January, that's when we struck and acted decisively to get those deals done and get them over the line and bring them into Liverpool Football Club. So whilst there is a pretty stringent, tight financial model, there can be times also when we can be flexible, but we've also seen when we can be inflexible. And obviously, most Reds will be hoping that there is some flexibility when it comes to getting a bigger deal done, like a Jude Bellingham next summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that, then I'll move forward a little bit because I was going to touch on this in a moment. But as you've sort of brought up the Gakpo deal, I think most Reds will definitely be hoping that for Bellingham. But a lot of Reds, including myself, will hope there's some flexibility before the end of this transfer window because I, like many others, believe we need a midfielder. So on that note, then I'll ask you quite straightforwardly, really. Is there an opportunity? You mentioned the Tchouaméni money that we clearly kept aside earlier on, potentially in the summer. You, in your tweet, in your thread, in your analysis, referenced that some of that money could potentially have been spent on Gakpo. Is it as simple as that, do you believe? And is there a chance that we've used that midfielder money on a forward this month? Do you think that's almost how it works? Do you think that could well be the case?
To an extent, yeah. I mean, one of the things to note is that different clubs operate very, very differently from one to the next. In terms of how they manage their finances and how they will get business done.
Yeah.
So Nottingham Forest, for example, they spent a huge amount of money in the summer transfer window, and that money was spent based on future revenue, which was that they knew that they were going to be bringing in over the course of the subsequent 12 months, 140 million pounds of Premier League money. They didn't have that money in the months of July and August when they were spending it on a new player every 2 or 3 days. So what they instead did was basically work with funders to secure money, knowing that future revenue streams would then be able to pay that money back. So effectively loaning that money. Liverpool Football Club have that ability to do act in the same way. So if they wanted to get some business done now, if the money isn't available, I personally think it is, but just in case it isn't, there are ways and means. There's lots of different vehicles through which they can secure money now based on future revenue streams. So, and this is common in football. It is very, very common. Many football clubs operate in this way. So if the club is really intent in terms of the coaching side and recruitment side to get a midfielder in this transfer window in the next 7 or so days, they can if they want to, but it depends on how financially flexible they want to be.
Okay, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Nottingham Forest there. I think we all are well aware of what Barcelona were doing during the summer, pulling every which lever they could find. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that the reference earlier on to sort of the centre-back month when we all were crying out for a centre-back and it wasn't coming was probably the clearest indicator we've had probably in FSG's reign that they are very, not set in the way, but very sure about the way they want to do things. And it takes a lot for them to sort of break the mould and to sort of break away from that model. And indeed add that flexibility. So it remains to be seen whether this January is big enough a crisis for them to sort of bend out of that again, I guess. Love them all over them, Mel. We are owned by FSG at the moment. Although it would seem they are open to a sale, whether it be either full or part investment. There's varying reports about that, depending on where you want to believe and I suppose what you want to believe. What do you see as the ideal solution when it comes to this? Do you see the self-sustaining model as something that needs to give, or do you see something that could work long term? It has worked up until this point for Liverpool, there's no doubt about it. But when it comes to keeping up with Manchester City's and Newcastle's and others of this world, do you think there has to be, and do you think FSG have noticed there has to be some sort of change and that's why they are looking for investment potentially?
Yeah, it's quite a loaded question, but I'll try and answer it as succinctly as I can.
Yeah.
So, right, with the ownership, I think that on the whole, they've done a good job in their 13 years at the club. I think that there have been clearly some mistakes that they've made, trying to trademark the Liver Bird, furloughing of staff, all these obvious things. But then they've gotten certain things right, notably appointing Klopp, hiring Edwards. I was very sceptical about that hire, and yet, that proved to be a masterstroke. And I think that was a very key part in us becoming, for a period, the strongest club in the world when it came to recruitment.
Yeah.
And that was our competitive advantage. That was the thing that allowed us to compete against oil money and, other clubs who had owners that were willing to spend significant amounts of their own wealth on their football clubs.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are now in a changing landscape with football finance. Financial fair play as we knew it is being phased out, and it is being replaced by a set of rules that have been designed by, who is it? The chairman of Paris Saint-Germain. On top of that, we saw FSG try to push through other things, other ideas, other initiatives that they felt could secure Liverpool's competitive edge against the likes of Manchester City and others through things like the Super League and Project Big Picture. Those have also fallen by the wayside. So when you look at those concepts that have fallen by the wayside, you look at financial fair play, which they really pinned their hopes on, and they hoped and expected even that would be implemented successfully, and UEFA failed miserably at that. All of these things that they were really pinning their hopes on, they've all gone. And what we are now seeing instead is just a complete free-for-all financially. It's like the Wild West. You're seeing Chelsea spending money like it's going out of business. There is that complete lack of self-sustainability at that top level. So what do we do as a club? Do we try and rigidly stick to a model that all of our rival clubs are now starting to ignore? Or do we try to adapt? And I feel we need to adapt. And adapt is in one of two ways. It's either FSG adapting their model or adapt in the sense of a change of ownership. I think the former is less likely. I think that they've rigidly stuck to their self-sustaining model, i.e. they don't put their own funds into the club. And I don't think that will change. I think the only way realistically for us to remain competitive is for outside investment. So then obviously there's been this discussion about, well, what if we had a minority stake sold and FSG still retained control? And, you know, obviously we've seen certain journalists who reported that might be the more likely outcome. I think personally, that's less likely for two reasons. The first of which is if you're an investor and FSG are asking you to invest X amount of money to buy a share of that club, but then you, as a group, hold only 10% or 20% of the ownership of that club. With that small stake, you don't really get a say in how the club is run. So you're putting all this money in, potentially to be invested back into the club, but you get no real say. That is something that probably wouldn't appeal to many investors.
No.
And then the second thing is that I don't think it's particularly what FSG want, because I've tweeted about it, the fact that FSG are looking to raise funds at this moment in time. There's been speculation that they want to potentially buy an NBA franchise. And obviously we all know that LeBron James is part of FSG. But at the same time, one of the confirmed investment opportunities that they are involved in is something called Fenway Corners, which is a multi-billion dollar real estate project in and around the Fenway Park area, which is obviously the stadium of Boston Red Sox, which are also owned by FSG. And they are involved in that project, and they are looking to deliver it, and they are looking to raise funds for it. So if it's a minority stake that's sold, and then there's an expectation from that investor and also from the fan base that money goes back into Liverpool, then that money can't then clearly go towards one or two of these other investment opportunities that they've got their eye on. So I think it doesn't work in their favor, and it doesn't work in the favor of potential investors. And that's why I think personally that the more likely outcome is a sale of either the club outright or a third party investing in potentially purchasing, 70%, 80%, and FSG retaining a smaller stake on the basis that maybe in another 5 or 10 years, the value of the club is increased, by another 1 or 2 or 3 billion pounds, and then obviously they could cash in on the remainder at that point. So if you held a gun to my head, that is my expectation. I could be completely wrong. You might find out tomorrow that all bets are off, that they're staying around for another few years. and I'll be looking with egg on my face. But there we go.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's the nature of the beast, isn't it? When you talk about anything like this, whether it be transfers or takeovers, it happens like that, and you just got to take your most educated guess, I guess, on it. Just wanted to pick up on something on there. Part of your thread and your brilliant analysis on all of this was one sort of possibility. You've alluded to two possibilities there in the way FSG could approach it, and one method you did allude to. I just want to get your quick thoughts on it. If you think maybe now that horse has already bolted, it's not going to work, is almost improving the model. You referenced Brighton and Brentford and just how impressive they've been in their recruitment. And we have been in years gone by, maybe not so much recently, if we're going to be brutally honest. But do you think that has gone now and Liverpool just getting better at what they did previously? Do you think with the Cities and the Newcastles and the PSGs of this world, do you think that's too late? Do you think you have to keep up with the Joneses now?
I think there can be a halfway house that you can still go out and buy your unicorns, but still unearth these gems. Napoli did a fantastic job in the summer.
Yes.
They got rid of so many of their big players, like Koulibaly, for example. Yeah. And there were people that were predicting that they would fall completely down the table. And instead, their window was inspired. And they brought in these players that nobody had ever heard of. And they've just hit the ground running and been absolutely magnificent.
We've seen that.
If they can do it. Yeah, why can't we do it? So that's why my view is, look, even if FSG decide to stay around, it's not the end of the world. You could still potentially, with the revenues that we're generating, bring in somebody like a big value signing like Bellingham, but supplement it with some really smart, astute signings. We've done it in the past. Robertson was completely inspired. Nobody thought, he'd turn into a world-class left back, and he did. And he's been a magnificent servant for us. And that's the sort of thing that I think, we could still do a really good job of. The only concern I have is that the people that were involved and played a key part in that kind of smart, inspired recruitment have either left or are leaving. And all the suggestions are, again, it is to an extent, speculation, hearsay, that recruitment decisions are being made more by Jurgen Klopp and Pep Linders, and less so by the analytics people. But if that, who knows to what extent that is true? Only people within the club themselves, for sure. But at the same time, I think that, look, if we still had the owners remain, I'd like us to go back to some form of smart, inspired business around getting these lower value signings that fall under the radar, and still sign, maybe your Jude Bellinghams and the likes of those, and that potentially can work with the levels of revenue that we generate. But it's the evidence of that recruitment team in the background, the analytics people, sporting directors falling by the wayside, that make me less confident that the club is looking to work in that direction.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. There's definitely a change in landscape behind the scenes in so many departments are seen at Liverpool, which is, I suppose, isn't helping the general mood around the fan base. Like the upheaval behind the scenes with everything else that's going on the pitch as well as off, just makes everyone a little bit uneasy about what the future looks like. In the future, then, you mentioned also that the club's cash flow statement will come out when the accounts are published, which will give us a clearer idea of exactly how the club looks financially. It'll tell us about sort of how we're paying for transfers in installments, like to Nunes. Gakpo could fall into that category as well. I think Diaz formally. So that'll be an interesting side of things as well. But just kind of round everything up now, how, given the off-field results, and we've obviously come third, record high, we've already spoke about that. And I've already spoken about the headlines, rightly or wrongly, being about the success off the field that we've enjoyed. How does this all play into the potential sale, whether it be in full or part of the club? Do potential investors look at the health for Liverpool from a commercial side of things and go, right now, that's in brilliant health? Like, it's a positive. It has to be from that point of view.
Yeah, well, with missing out on the Champions League, it's the same exact kind of dynamic that will be at play when it comes to the sale of Manchester United. Though United are in the top four, it's very possible that they could still slip out by the end of the season. And if that happens to them, that would have been 2 years in a row for them to miss out on the Champions League, which will then take a substantial hit on some of their key commercial deals. But at the same time, it wouldn't necessarily have a massive impact on the valuation of either them or Liverpool Football Club.
Yeah.
So, Liverpool as a club know, for example, that the season after next, essentially, there are 5 places up for grabs for the Champions League. The competition is expanding. And so if Liverpool do miss out on the top 4, they've got a very good chance of getting back in to the Champions League the following season. So it might be only 1 season out of the competition before going back in. So I don't think it would have a altogether significant effect on the valuation of the club.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And do you think that would be something, therefore, that would be factored in by any potential investors? The fact that the coefficient's changing next year and Liverpool are likely to be in, and the general growth commercially, and of course the size of Liverpool, and as you rightly mentioned, Manchester United, these figures don't matter as much on clubs of this huge, enormous scale because we are so big, and they know that we might have a bad season, we might have a bad 2 seasons, the same with United, but the club remains, so it doesn't really have a huge impact in that case. Is that what you're saying?
They'll be looking at it longer term.
Yeah.
Just a single season won't necessarily spike and skew valuations. And I think at the same time, on the flip side, FSG as a selling entity won't be thinking of, okay, well, because we might potentially as a club miss out on top 4, therefore we should reduce the value of the club by 10, 15, 20%.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think certainly with decisions of this nature, it will be looked at in the long term, and as part of the due diligence, potential buyers will also be looking at the wider factors such as, well, when the when the distribution rights for the Premier League next comes up, when distribution rights for the Champions League next come up, what are the value of those deals likely to be? What about commercial deals? Liverpool Football Club's shirt deal with Nike, kit deal with Nike rather, comes up in just over 2 years. So what kind of deal can Liverpool strike at that point in time? So, those are the types of things which will be perhaps of greater influence on the valuation than potentially missing out on the Champions League for a year.
Yeah, 100%. And just quickly, just to finally say, on the valuation, we've seen a few different figures branded about. You're far more knowledgeable about this sort of thing than I and most of the listeners are. How would you value Liverpool Football Club compared to some of the money that you've seen branded?
Well, I mean, obviously, in terms of Liverpool, within the various media reports in the last 2.5 months, we've seen figures from about 2.7 up to, I think, 4 billion.
Yeah.
I think about 3.5 to 4 is about right. I mean, I think that's a very good value for the club. I mean, we've seen reports about Manchester United being valued at 6 to 7 billion, which is absurd. Their revenue, as we touched on right at the start of this, has been exceeded by Liverpool. Yeah. And then on top of that, their stadium is, creaking and falling. It's literally leaking. That it needs significant investment. Their training ground needs significant investment. Their debt runs into hundreds of millions. When you factor all of those things in, Liverpool is a far more attractive proposition. Not least for which, we're a much greater club than they are anyway. I mean, who'd want to buy United? So, Liverpool. If you're an investor and you're looking at both and thinking, right, which one should we go for? It has to be Liverpool.
Yeah, if you're watching this now, any investors, take that last bit on board. You can remember the rest of it, but take that last bit on board. No, I tend to agree with you on many of them points. And certainly the fact Old Trafford is leaking. But yeah, Manchester United are being sold essentially for the name and the fact they are a huge global brand. Let's not shy away from that fact. We can joke as much as we like, but Liverpool are a huge global brand. Plus, the stadium's in good state, it's in good health, it's getting better all the time. Commercially, we're clearly successful. So, yeah, I tend to agree with you, but I would. So, there we go. No, it's been a pleasure. It's been very insightful. Before we go, I've mentioned your Twitter a few times. If you want to give that a plug. Plus, of course, the stuff over on Anfield Index. I believe you did quite an in-depth episode on this very topic recently. So, please plug away.
Thank you, Dan. So, for my tweets about mostly the football club, I can be found at Chatra, so MOCHATRA, and I regularly produce podcasts mostly relating to football finance for Anfield Index called Money Talks. And as you noted, I put out a podcast just in the last few days covering the Deloitte Money League in a fair amount of detail with Trev Downey. So, and that's free to access as well now. So do give it a listen if you get the chance.
Happy days, yeah. Money League Musings, I think I might be saying. That was called the episode. Yeah, so yeah, check that out and make sure you give it a listen. Yeah, Mo, like I say, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. That'll be all we've got time for this episode of Expert Insight. Make sure you check out all the back catalogue. Plus, got some transfer insights coming up for you this week before Liverpool potentially sign someone on deadline day or before. We'll see. Let's hope. Until then, I'll see you later. Take care. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that as I took a closer look at all the facts and figures following the publication of the Deloitte Money League. If you want more content just like that, then head over to Redmen Plus now and sign up as a club captain using the code EXPERT and you'll get the first 3 months for just 99p. You'll see me chatting to Florian Plettenberg about transfers, Yuri Levy about the Middle East interest and Dr. Raj about all the injury worries at Liverpool. So, get over there now, get it done, and I'll see you there.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that show. I'm sure you did. If you want even more amazing Redmen content in your ears or in your eyes, come and join us over on redmenplus.com. We've got absolutely amazing interviews, features, documentaries, and even more of the shows like you've just watched. So yeah, head on over to redmenplus.com and become a Redmen Plus club captain or club legend. I promise you won't regret it.